I'm Dylan Ratigan. I've interviewed nearly every CEO and most world leaders during the past 25 years. And now on Bootstrapping, I'm turning my attention to the new CEOs and the irrepressible entrepreneurs leading the next generation of innovation in the world. Welcome back to tastylive. I am Dylan Ratigan. Time for another episode of Bootstrapping. Our guest, David Alpert, the company Skybound Entertainment. David, pleasure to make the acquaintance. I was reading the backstory of the company, which has a history, more than 10 years, producing huge content ecosystems, and the narrative of empowering creators and shifting it sort of spoke to the age-old balance of power in Hollywood between the financier, the creator, and shall we say, the distributor. And I'm curious what did Skybound bring to that relationship that allowed you to have the success that you now will get into, but you have some huge properties that you've built?
Well, first of all, Dylan, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a big fan, and it's an honor to be here. As far as your question goes, Hollywood is basically built off of exploiting creators. Like, that's the history of Hollywood, from everything from music, film, television, video games. And my business partner, Robert Kirkman, and we looked at that system and thought, what if we didn't do that? What if we actually treated creators as partners? What if we did the right thing morally? Is there a way that we can actually turn that into a successful business? And the thought was that creators who create these amazing franchises that we all know and love and spend hours and hours in, that if we gave them a bigger seat at the table, that not only would they make better content for us, but it'd actually be sort of morally right and financially rewarding.
And I'm assuming you presume you would get better deals because you would get looks at deals with bigger talent, because you're going to give them better deals if they work with your financing or your infrastructure than if they take a traditional studio deal. So theoretically, you have a business advantage to get better looks.
That's right.
At the outset.
And creative types tend to be friends with a lot of other creative types, and they talk. One of the things that creative types do the most is they'll go to a bar and they'll talk about their deals. And so if you treat somebody poorly, everybody in town knows that you're treating them poorly. But if you treat them right, they're like, hey, wait a second, I did business with Skybound, and it was great. They took care of me. They gave me a real seat at the table. They paid me what I was supposed to get paid. And I saw opportunities I wouldn't see anywhere else. And that's been a virtuous cycle for us.
Mm-hmm. It's one thing to have a different deal structure, which obviously has been successful, not just with you. There's other studios. There's a recent, other people with different angles. I don't want to group you too much, but there's certainly other entities that have come out with financing saying that, they want the same narrative that you're prosecuting. And so let's assume that we're going to call that a success to one degree or another. Your longevity, I can think of a few other examples. But then the question becomes, does that make for better content? Does giving if the one deal structure is the old Hollywood deal, which is screw you, I own the rights to the Beatles and you can go home, and the new deal is everybody's sitting aligned interests on the back end, we'll call it, however that shakes out. Does the aligned interest deal, as opposed to the Hollywood deal, make for better content?
So I would argue it does. And this ties into sort of like the second major principle of Skybound, which is almost every other media company out there is still organized around 20th century distribution methods. So even Netflix, which is an incredibly innovative and disruptive company, is really just a linear video company. And they're really focused on you subscribing to Netflix. And what we think about is a 360 experience, right? So I grew up, I would read the books, I would watch the movies, I'd play the games, but there's not one company that's organized around building a connection with you through the IP itself and the entire
into an ecosystem as opposed to into an event.
That's right. That's right. And by having the creator have a seat at the table, you're able to sort of think it through from the get-go. So you're not just like, oh, we have to get this one movie or this one TV show out the door. You're able to think about like, okay, how does this TV show intersect and interact with a video game? How do they feel not, a lot of the original sort of, normally what happens at a studio is they'll make a hit movie and then they hand it over to their consumer products group. That consumer products group, who's not involved in making the movie, then basically replicates that movie experience inside a video game. That's boring for a fan. You saw that.
And you've eliminated the creator from the writing of the game.
That's right. That's right. And so we look at it and say,
Instead
hey,
of being complementary assets that feed each other, they become redundant assets that devalue each other.
that's right.
But, my friend, or of standing up an ecosystem, which you have done successfully, so I want to hear about it, does require a little bit more sophisticated process engineering and budget sequencing and orchestration of multiple things in parallel.
Yes.
Where it's like a kitchen with many things on the stove, and things start at different times, but they have to all end in a certain sequence in order to optimize their impact.
So the way we look at
how do
it,
you manage all those trains? You got a game going, you got a movie going, you've got a strategy to lay a sequence over 5 years instead of an ecosystem, and you have your tentpole as your book, and your book is holding the narrative, but then the book passed it, and then there's the physical activation in the summer, and then this and the this. How much of that is pre-planned, I guess I would ask, and strategically, like we have this, and how much of that is audible based on available opportunity at the time?
So, we at this point we have over 150 owned and operated IP. I wish I could tell you, Dylan, that every single one of them is a giant success and has built franchises of billions of dollars. It's not the case. So what we like to do is we set up our funnel this way. We create creator-centric, high quality but low cost IP in mediums like comic books, audio, board games, things that we can sort of get to market relatively quickly and inexpensively.
Test IP on a candidate.
That's right. And we look at that moment, we test for signal, right? Does this follow the normal sales curve? Is there a outspoken audience that's embracing it? When we had, for instance, on The Walking Dead, normally you see a decline in sales from issue to issue, right? So your first issue is your biggest, and then it goes down.
Has a half-life, and you try to manage the half-life.
But here we saw every issue, the numbers were going up. So it was a very stark comparison where you have an up and to the right versus a down to the right. And so we were like, oh, there's something here. There's clearly resonance, and it's connecting on a deeper level. So when we see that type of thing, then we're like, okay, we take that and we say, let's look at film and television, not as an end in itself, but thinking about it as a place where we can market and reach the biggest part of the consumer base, right? Film and TV, despite being small in comparison to the overall media sector, when you look at it in comparison to video games, it still commands this huge section of sort of the cultural conversation, right? And that we look at as like, that's a fantastic way to popularize our content.
So it sounds like the key to your business is to test as much content as possible for the most efficient pricing with the best results, so that you know where to place your additional bets, so to speak, so that where you can see where you're getting an indication from test and learn, where you can bet up.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that we don't want to be so much there that we can't give each one its nice chance to sort of make it out, right? We have to give each IP its own window, its own marketing support. We have to give it its best chance at life, because finding these things, finding one of these franchises is worth billions, but it's rare. So we have two, and we're on our way to three. But it's only because we really nurture them in their infancy.
Mm-hmm. Is it the writers or is it the talent? Who's the most important creator in Hollywood?
Look, I firmly believe that everything starts with the written word. The person who comes up with that core idea, that person to me is the genius, the maestro. That's the magic of what we do.
Not that we want to go into it, but it comes up. Do you have an opinion on the negotiation with the writers in Hollywood?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I stand with the writers, right? Writers.
It's easy for everybody to stand with the writers if you're creative at all, I would imagine.
I mean, you kind of have to. I think it's a really tough negotiation that they're in right now. And I think, but for COVID, we would have had this 3 years ago, and it probably would have been a better time for them to have that conversation. I think the streamers were in a much healthier situation. The economy was very different. I think it's an unfortunate timing for them, but I honestly hope we can get through this as fast as possible. But I fear it's going to
So
go
coming
long.
back to Skybound, you're looking for a great writer to partner with first and foremost.
A great writer, but when I think of it, that original idea, it could be an artist, right? Like my mom is a fine artist and came out of the world of painting and sculpting. And if you look at that, like someone could have that idea. It could be a sculpture. It could be who has that sort of that, who takes a blank page and makes something. It could be an artist, it could be a writer, it could be a singer, right? Who comes up with that initial conception of what the idea is? That's the magic to me.
Mm-hmm. And then that person you're saying maintains an equity stake in that IP over its lifespan with Skybound.
They maintain an ownership piece in the IP as well as creative control, and that's the area where we say, hey, look, on one of our IPs, we had a massive opportunity to do an ice cream licensing deal, and I was like, this is awesome. I love ice cream, and I like getting doing successful financial deals. And the creator said, no, this is it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. Whereas at a normal studio, that would have been like, yeah, that's nice. We're doing the deal.
And has that been beneficial to you long term? Because obviously that level of that shift in governance authority, which is what you're talking about, which is consequential, especially in the creative industry, influences resources and outcomes and all the rest of that. Do you feel like you've been more successful by enduring the lack of control in that structure?
Absolutely. Unlike a lot of people, I think artists are rational. And sometimes when they're acting irrational, it's in service of their art. And so as long as you find an artist who understands and you bring the opportunities, you should be forced to justify why it's a good idea. Right? If it's only in service of the bottom line, you have to ask, is that really in the interest of the bottom line today? Right? Or are you trying to maximize the value of this brand and this IP for its life? And the artists generally are looking at it for the lifespan. And often, so for us, I can point to a number of those things where in the moment I didn't necessarily understand why this was the right decision to make. But over time, we've come to see that there's a broader ecosystem out there and that people who made similar decisions that we took, different to what we took, didn't do as well.
And how much of your confidence your confidence must be hugely influenced by the success of Walking Dead, for instance.
Absolutely, 100%. Walking Dead, and now we have Invincible out there, which has been a huge hit for us. And just seeing that sort of success. And by the way, when we wanted to do Walking Dead, people are like, no one's done a serialized horror show on television ever. We're like, yeah, that's great. That's the opportunity.
That's the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And when we did Invincible, people said, no, there's no hour-long animated TV shows. There's no 2D serious TV shows. It's got to be a comedy or half hour. We're like, no, this needs to be an hour-long, R-rated serious cartoon. And people are like, that doesn't make sense. Right? That's the opportunity.
And so then how do you filter at the top of your architecture? Because there's no shortage of creators and there's a lot of diamonds, and then there's a lot of it's a boneyard out there, sir. And so how do you filter on these?
So we look at, we specialize really in the genre space, right? So the action, thriller, horror, science fiction, fantasy, like those genres. So one, we self-select there. Two, we look for people that aren't just looking for a paycheck, right? They're looking to get paid, but there's a passion here. There's something special about what they're doing that we really, really believe in. And it sounds a little vague, but you see it on the page. You're like, oh, this is evocative of a bigger, broader world. You instantly know it, right? When I read the I have nothing to do with it, but I read the Twilight book in galleys, and I was like, I knew the second I read it that was going to be giant. Not my genre, not my thing, but I knew it.
That's kind of my next question, because if you can think back, I mean, it's impossible. This is a human impossibility, so bear with me. But if you can think back to your instincts when you first looked at The Walking Dead or Invincible, compared to, let's say, 5 others that you've loved that just didn't turn into something, but at the time you were like, as happy about that as anything you've ever seen. Do you feel like that you can observe at the time? In retrospect, obviously, all these things are easy or easier. But do you think it's possible for an executive, any executive, yourself or even whatever, Walt Disney, to discern between probable success from a script?
Well, first I'd say he's a better executive than I am. So don't
All
want
of
to put
them,
this.
all of them.
Yeah. But
Same
I would.
gig, same gig.
Yeah, exactly. What I would say is, it's hard to make something. It's hard to make anything. It's hard to make something good. Once you make something good, it's hard to find the right path to market. Once you find the right path to market, it's hard to be in the market at the right time. Once you're there at the right time, it's hard for the audience to connect. And once you connect, it's hard to stay connected. So that's the pyramid that you have to go. So I think there's been plenty of huge, great IP that's been made, that's come out, that just didn't find the audience, either because it was marketed incorrectly, was released at a bad time, something happened or shifted in the world when those things happen. And it's a shame because you really get one shot to be part of that cultural conversation. So
I mean, do you think
I'd
there's a
like,
business resurrecting the boneyard from things that were great that were never that could be relaunched?
I
There might be
do.
a business there.
I do. I actually think there's it's almost like looking at it's like a private equity play where you're sort of looking for hidden value or untapped value inside of things. And honestly, part of what I'm doing at Skybound is we picked up old novels like Chronicles of Amber, which is one of the greatest science fiction fantasy novels of all time. It just didn't get made at the time, but I still think there's a huge opportunity in there.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to look at when I came to Hollywood in the early 2000s, Sony passed on buying Marvel for $25 million. They could have bought the entire Marvel catalog for $25 million. They said, no, we'll just spend $10 million to buy Spider-Man. Like, why waste $15 million on the rest of Marvel?
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it at the time, there's a lot of good business reasons why. They made those little low budget movies. They hadn't really done anything. You're like, why would you want Iron Man or the Avengers or anything like that, or Guardians of the Galaxy? You wouldn't want any of that stuff. And now you look at it, like, oh my God, those are worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. So I think there's a huge business in picking the right IP that's been overlooked throughout time.
The business in general is not what it was. It'll be the last question for you. You referenced it, right? Whether the bloom is off the rose with the streamers as the unlimited money machine of the world's ultimate studio, unlimited. Fun.
Yep.
We have a post-COVID sort of whatever the shakeout is, which clearly includes, first release streaming still. I mean, with $20 and you can watch whatever the heck it is. Where are entertainment economics? What is equilibrium? I guess where are we headed?
So here's where I really think about it. Like, I love Game of Thrones, right? I love George R. R. Martin and Game of Thrones. I have no allegiance specifically to HBO or HBO Max or Max Plus or Go, whatever they're called today. I have no allegiance to them. I'll go wherever Game of Thrones is. So I buy all the books, right? I watched every episode. I bought their very expensive whiskeys. I played their horrible video games. I've done all those things, and I'll do it all of it. And I think that's the way, when you look at the way, when we were growing up, there was high switching costs, right? If you were watching TV and you saw an advertisement for a movie, you then had to find a way to get from your house to the movie theater, buy a ticket. Hopefully it was in the theater that you were going to. There's all sorts of switching costs that were in there. Whereas now I look at the way that kids consume content. It's all here. They read, they play, they watch, they listen, they comment, they engage, they make their own versions of the same thing right here. And I think if you are not making content for that audience, you're losing the huge opportunity. So what do I mean by that? I think that the bloom is off the rose for streaming video as a be all and end all. But for us at Skybound, we make most of our money in the video game space, right? And you think about it, even a TV show you love, if you watch a whole season, it's 8 hours, 10 hours of content. Maybe you watch it twice, maybe, if you really love it. Like, how many shows do you watch really 2 times?
I can watch a lot of Seinfeld, but other than
I can watch that. Yeah, I can watch. I probably watched a lot of
I've
stuff. I've
watched
watched a
more
lot
than
of stuff.
twice, more than twice.
I would agree with that.
But
But in a
otherwise,
video game, you can go 60, 80, 100 hours inside of the same experience. And we've been trained that Seinfeld is free, right? Like you don't pay anything a la carte for Seinfeld. Whereas for whatever reason, historical and otherwise, people are used to paying for video games and it's an accepted part of the ecosystem. So for us, we look at great, use streaming to help promote our content that we then can monetize in other ways, specifically direct to consumer, merchandising, and gaming. And that's really sort of the core of our funnel. And I think because we're organized around the IP and not the medium, I think we'll always be able to make more money than other companies.
like, because your thesis is Sumner Redstone from a different generation, which is content is king,
That's right.
and that I'll give you the IP. You can enjoy the TV show because I'm gonna have such strong ties to my IP that I can bring you from whatever that initial point of contact is into a world that is a whole bunch of economics, whether it's merchandise related, physical related, or video game related, which is a bonanza of activity commercially and an extension of that pleasant experience you had for free when you enjoyed the IP the first time.
That's right. I was able to move millions of bottles of Walking Dead wine because of the show.
Mm-hmm.
We made more
I got
money
it.
off of the wine and the beer and the bourbon deals that we did that we made from the show that year.
Mm-hmm.
That's a crazy. That shows in and of. But I'm not even talking about the video game stuff. That's where I see the economics really being interesting.
And the issue with economics like that, typically with content, is it tends to suggest that because the economics are tied up in an ancillary, whether it's a video game or whether it's a piece of merchandise or an experience or a plane ticket or whatever it is that in doing that, that the story itself is compromised. And the interesting thing about what you're asserting is that actually it's the antithesis where you have to have brutal allegiance to the story and give the creator, in order for the story to have a strong enough tie in the open field to even open up the ancillary room.
So yeah, so this is interesting.
But you see where the risk is. Well, now that you're ancillary motivated, the story's compromised, which goes to your ice cream debate of earlier.
That's right. And so we had one of our fun things that we had done pre-COVID was we had a Walking Dead cruise that we did every year that's sold out every year that we did it. And one of the great things was it made us money, but more importantly, we had 5,000 people. We had a floating focus group, people that were willing to give us 4 to 5 days of their time to celebrate their fandom. And so we would ask them questions about what they wanted. And so we decided that we'd want to do the wine. And we asked them, would they do it? Did they want it? And the only thing they came back with, so they said, yes, we absolutely want it, but it can't just be putting a logo on a bottle. You have to have a reason to do it, a story reason. And I was like, how do you tell a story in wine? Because normally you're talking about the vineyard, you're talking about the farmer, the grape. And so my partner, Robert, the creator, he said, let's make an AR app. And you hold up your phone, and basically the first bottle you buy, a zombie jumps out and breaks your phone.
Okay.
And then the second bottle, Rick, who's the lead of The Walking Dead, he'll come out and fight the zombie. And so each additional bottle that you had a little bit more of this vignette that was part of a story that connected to the back of an episode that he had written about 5 years earlier. So this was like the answer to a fan question. It could only be found if you had your app and you had these bottles. Mm-hmm. And it was a complete game changer about the way we did it.
Because it turns the commercial asset from a liability to an asset.
That's right.
It's now it goes from being, oh, you're selling wine to, oh, this is a story enhancement.
That's right. That's right. And
those are tricky meetings. I mean, I can see where you could get yourself into a lot of ice cream meetings.
I like ice cream.
I'm sure you do. Where you're like, is there any ice cream in the story from 5 years ago with the zombie? They're like, no, there is not.
It's like, are you sure? Are you really like, sure?
I don't know. You weren't with him at home every night. He could have been having ice cream. You don't know.
Exactly.
It's a pleasure to make the acquaintance, David.
Awesome, Dylan. Thank you so much.
All right. Congratulations on your success as well. David Alpert, Skybound Entertainment. I am Dylan Ratigan. This is Bootstrapping, and you are watching Tasty Live.